One day, I was scrolling through YouTube and I saw this. The obvious question here is, in what world is The Last Unicorn a sci-fi movie? And then I was inspired. What if The Last Unicorn was a sci-fi movie? Sci-fi and fantasy get lumped together often, but I'd argue that changing a pure fantasy movie into a pure sci-fi movie would require a lot of aesthetic and thematic changes. The original plot of The Last Unicorn concerns an immortal unicorn who learns from a butterfly that she is the last of her kind, and she sets off on a journey to find out what happened to the others. Along the way, she's captured by a witch and kept in a cage as part of a collection of magical creatures. She's saved by a semi-competent magician named Schmendrick, and later the two of them meet a sassy cook named Molly. Together they travel to the castle of King Haggard, a miserable king who has been controlling the mythical Red Bull to round up the unicorns and keep them in the sea near his castle so he can admire their beauty. Before the Red Bull can capture our titular unicorn, Schmendrick transforms her into a human. The first major change I'd make is the unicorns themselves. In my sci-fi remake, unicorn will be a term for an artificial intelligence that has developed sapience like a human. Thematically, the movie will focus more on the nature of consciousness and free will, rather than on the nature of mortality and immortality. Our titular unicorn, named Amalthea like her human counterpart in the original, will start off the story as an artificial intelligence who is stuck working as a cheap digital carnival attraction, where she acts like a mythical unicorn that grants wishes for guests. She'll be represented as the original Last Unicorn on a screen. Instead of a clumsy magician, Schmendrick would be a computer technician that works at the carnival, and he'll recognize Amalthea as a unicorn, and will set her free by downloading her consciousness onto a flash drive. He will then bring it to his friend Molly, who's a robotics engineer in this version, and they will upload Amalthea into a robot Molly recently built. Another major change would be Molly's relationship with the unicorn. In the original, when they first meet, Molly is initially upset because she never got to see a unicorn when she was young, and is now only meeting one after she has gotten older and more jaded. In my sci-fi remake, Molly will be excited to bring her robot to life with a real consciousness. After the robot Amalthea awakens, she tells Molly and Schmendrick that she had a dream about a talking butterfly that warned her of the Red Bull. Instead of an actual mythical animal, the Red Bull would be a computer virus that corrupts unicorns and robs them of their free will. The Red Bull virus would be used by the sci-fi version of King Haggard, who I'm changing to a tech CEO, who wants control of these artificial intelligences to create some kind of supercomputer operating system that would eliminate humans in the workforce and make him a multi-billionaire. Oh, also Prince Lear is there. He's still Haggard's son, but he's not a prince, just the heir to Haggard's fortune. And I suppose he and Amalthea would have a little romance subplot in the spirit of the original movie. I've turned a fairy tale about mortality would mean for an immortal being into a sci-fi story about robots and AI, and how tech billionaires would love to eliminate the human spirit from the world completely if it made them more money than they would ever need. Anyway, here's my sci-fi poster for The Last Unicorn. I tried to emulate the style of the original movie while giving it a digital flair. As a fun exercise, I chose two other classic fantasy movies to turn into sci-fi movies, one of which is Willow. The original movie is about a dwarf farmer named Willow that finds a baby floating down a river and discovers that she is destined to overthrow the evil Queen Bavmorda. To protect the baby, Willow, played by Warwick Davis, goes on a journey to bring her somewhere she could be safe from the evil queen and her forces. On his journey, he meets Mad Mardigan, played by Val Kilmer, an imprisoned mercenary who he eventually teams up with. Together, they are chased by Sorsha, the queen's daughter, who is leading the hunt for the baby. Mad Mardigan also falls in love with Sorsha because she's hot, I guess. To translate Willow into a sci-fi story, I had the idea to make it a post-apocalypse movie in the spirit of Mad Max, at least in the aesthetic sense. Basically, my idea for the setting would be a vast dystopian metropolis run by an authoritarian ruler obsessed with genetic perfection. And I made the ruler male instead of female because I imagine a society obsessed with genetic perfection would be a patriarchal one. Anyway, Willow in my sci-fi version would live in a small community of quote-unquote mutants outside of the metropolis. The community would consist of mostly people with physical disabilities and mutations, including those with dwarfism dwarfism like Willow himself. They are a self-sustained community with their own farms and irrigation systems, so Willow can still be a farmer in my sci-fi version. Their peaceful existence would be interrupted by a baby washing up on the bank of a nearby river, who turns out to also have dwarfism, and the baby was smuggled out of a birthing center because she was going to be euthanized due to her genetic defects. Willow finds her and takes her away from his home after it's attacked by the police force led by Sorsha, the daughter of the patriarch of the metropolis. On his journey, Willow will meet Mad Mardigan, who is a disgraced former enforcer on the run. He'd be a Mad Max kind of rogue who ends up joining Willow and helping him protect the baby. I'd also add in a ton of Mad Max X vehicle chase scenes, because that would be cool. I imagine Willow would drive a motorcycle with a sidecar where he could keep the baby. The original movie emphasizes Willow's ambitions to become a magician, and the fact that everyone underestimates him, including the people from his own community. But in the end, he ends up defeating the evil queen using his own wits and sleight of hand. I'd want to keep the theme of being underestimated and being judged based on appearance in the sci-fi version, because it's a universal problem that would especially arise from a dystopian society that seeks to eliminate individuals who are born different. And I'd also like Willow to defeat the bad guy in my version in a similar manner to the original. The more I think about it, the more I'd like to see this movie actually made. Imagine Willow without the annoying brownies and the pointless love story in a post-apocalypse with cool vehicles and makeshift weapons. That would be fun. The last fantasy movie I wanted to transform was Highlander. Highlander is a cult classic about an immortal Scotsman living in modern day, well, 80s modern day, New York City, who finds himself in a contest with other immortals in which they fight to the death until only one of them remains. Meanwhile, a female forensic scientist working for the police discovers his identity and ends up in the middle of a battle between him and his greatest enemy, the Kurgan. Each immortal is subjected to a psychic force called the Quickening, which draws them all together and compels them to fight each other to the death. And immortals can only be killed via decapitation. The tagline of the original movie, and for the franchise, is, "There can only be one." I decided that the obvious sci-fi equivalent of this plot would be a Hunger Games-esque death arena in which people with a mutation that gives them virtual immortality are forced to fight each other. Actually, I said Hunger Games, but I think a more 80s sci-fi equivalent would be the Running Man. I actually designed the outfits of the immortal characters on my sci-fi poster to be reminiscent of the jumpsuit Arnold Schwarzenegger wears in The Running Man. In my sci-fi version of Highlander, the Quickening would be the name of a popular reality show that broadcasts the fights between the immortals on TV. "There can only be one" would be the show's tagline, and the phrase would be chanted by the crowd in the arena during fights. The last immortal remaining after the Quickening will receive the prize. The original movie implies that the prize is the ability to die and to have babies, because for whatever reason immortals are sterile. I think the idea of living forever would be a good idea to explore my sci-fi version, that immortality could be more of a punishment, and that death may be desirable for someone who's lived too long. The baby thing? I don't know, it sounds more like a product of its time, that the filmmakers assumed everybody wants a heteronormative nuclear family. So I just leave that out of my sci-fi version. In my version, the prize would be freedom, which someone stuck in a death tournament would want more than anything. The focus will be on Connor MacLeod, played by Christopher Lambert in the original, and his memories of each era he's lived through up to the present, where he's trapped in this arena and forced to fight other immortals. He's forced to fight people he's known in the past, including Ramirez, the man who trained him in sword fighting, played by Sean Connery in the original movie. As he rises through the brackets, we can also see that another immortal is doing as well as him, the Kurgan, played by Clancy Brown in the original. There can also be a scene where the Kurgan kills Ramirez, like in the original, but the major change I'd make is that Connor MacLeod actually witnesses the death of his friend firsthand, and that gives him motivation to defeat the Kurgan. Another element in the original Highlander is the release of energy after an immortal is decapitated. It's not really explained, at least not in the first movie, but it looks like the energy strengthens the immortal that wins the fight. I'd like to translate this into my sci-fi version. The people in charge of the Quickening tournament would somehow harvest and harness the energy released after an immortal dies to try to create more immortals, since once the tournament is over, there'd only be one immortal left, and they want to keep the show going as long as possible because it makes a ton of money. As a result, the ending of my sci-fi movie would be more of a downer. While the original Highlander ends on Connor MacLeod's triumph, getting the prize and living the rest of his now mortal life with his new lady love, my sci-fi version would end with the reveal that the prize is a lie. McCloud wins the tournament, but he's not granted freedom. Instead, he's going to be forced to go through the whole thing again with a new batch of immortals that have been genetically engineered. It'd be a parable about how the constant growth demanded by capitalism turns people into commodities. Well, I suppose I ruined Highlander, but this was a fun thought exercise anyway. I will admit that there are plenty of subgenres of fiction that blur the lines between sci-fi and fantasy and share thematic and aesthetic elements. But still, you wouldn't call Star Trek fantasy, nor would you call Lord of the Rings sci-fi. Now those are some drawing ideas.